Sarah Mitchell walked through the community center doors with her daughter Emma clinging to her hand. The 7-year-old girl bounced with excitement, her pigtails swinging as she chattered about her upcoming school talent show. Sarah smiled down at her, though exhaustion lined every corner of her face. At 32, she looked older than her years, carrying invisible weights that no one else could see. The community center smelled of fresh coffee and old wood. Voices echoed from various rooms where people gathered for evening classes and social groups. Sarah had never been here before. She preferred staying home, keeping to herself, maintaining the careful routine that kept her days predictable and safe. But Emma had begged her mother to come, pleading with those big brown eyes that Sarah could never resist. Emma's best friend Sophie was performing a piano piece at the talent show, and the girls had convinced their mothers to attend the community center's open practice night. Sophie's mother, Linda, waved at them from across the lobby. She was everything Sarah felt she was not. Confident, put together, always smiling. Linda wore her success like a comfortable coat while Sarah wore her pain like chains. They walked into the main hall where a beautiful grand piano sat in the center, its black surface gleaming under the overhead lights. Several parents sat in folding chairs along the walls while children took turns at the piano. Some played simple melodies with obvious mistakes. Others stumbled through scales. The atmosphere was warm and encouraging, filled with gentle applause and supportive comments. Sarah found a chair in the back corner, her usual position in any room. She preferred shadows to spotlights, silence to attention. Emma ran off to join Sophie, and the two girls giggled together, whispering secrets that only best friends share. Sarah watched her daughter with a mixture of love and sadness. Emma deserved so much more than what Sarah felt capable of giving. A mother who baked cookies for school events. A mother who volunteered for field trips. A mother who was not broken. Linda sat down beside Sarah, offering her a cup of coffee from the refreshment table. Sarah accepted it with a quiet thank you, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. Linda chatted easily about the talent show, about Sophie's nervousness, about the weather and weekend plans. Sarah nodded at appropriate moments, offering brief responses that did not invite deeper conversation. She had become an expert at appearing present while remaining distant. The evening continued with children cycling through their practice pieces. Some showed natural talent while others simply enjoyed making noise. The piano teacher, an elderly woman named Mrs. Chun, offered gentle corrections and endless patience. She had taught piano in this community center for over 20 years, and her love for music radiated from every word of encouragement she spoke. Emma eventually tugged on Sarah's sleeve. "Mom," Mrs. Chun says, "anyone can try the piano. Will you play something?" Her daughter's eyes shone with hope and curiosity. Sarah's heart dropped into her stomach. She shook her head quickly, too quickly. Emma's face fell with disappointment. "Your mom plays piano?" Linda asked with surprise and interest. "I had no idea." "You should definitely play something, Sarah. The kids would love it." Sarah felt trapped. Her hands began to tremble slightly, and she pressed them against her thighs to still them. "I haven't played in years," she said quietly, her voice barely audible. "I wouldn't remember anything." Emma persisted with the innocent cruelty of children who do not understand the depths of adult pain. "Please, Mom? Just one song? You told me you used to play when you were little." Other parents had noticed the conversation. Mrs. Chun walked over with her kind, wrinkled face and warm smile. "We would be honored to hear you play, dear. Music is meant to be shared, and this is a safe space for everyone, no matter their skill level." Sarah felt the walls closing in. Her breathing became shallow. All eyes had turned toward her, waiting, expecting. The piano sat there in the center of the room like a beautiful monster from her past. She had not touched piano keys in 15 years. Not since before everything changed. Not since her world collapsed. But Emma's hand slipped into hers, small and trusting. Sarah looked down at her daughter and saw such simple faith that something inside her chest cracked open just slightly. Maybe, she thought, maybe she could do this one small thing. Just a simple song. Nothing complicated. Nothing that would reach too deep into the places she kept locked away. She stood slowly, her legs feeling unsteady. Emma squeezed her hand once more before releasing it. Sarah walked toward the piano as if moving through water, each step requiring enormous effort. The room had gone quiet. Even the children sensed something significant was happening, though they could not name what. Sarah sat on the piano bench, the same type of bench she had sat on as a child. Her hands hovered over the keys, and she noticed they were shaking. She tried to remember something simple, something safe. Maybe a children's song. Maybe a basic scale. Anything that would not unlock the vault of memories she had sealed shut. But the moment her fingers touched the smooth ivory keys, something happened that Sarah did not expect and could not control. Her hands moved of their own accord, and the first notes that emerged were not from a children's song. They were from a piece she had learned long ago in another life when she was a different person. The melody poured out of her, haunting and beautiful. It was Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, a piece she had played at her high school recital, the piece she had been practicing the night everything changed. Her fingers remembered what her mind had tried to forget. They moved across the keys with a grace and precision that surprised even her. But as the music filled the room, something else filled it too. Sarah's carefully constructed walls began to crumble. The emotion she had buried for 15 years rose up through the music. Every note carried the weight of her hidden pain. The melody became a confession, a cry, a story told without words. Tears began streaming down Sarah's face, though she barely noticed. She could not stop playing even as her vision blurred. The music had taken control, pulling from her depths she had not dared to explore in over a decade. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs, but her hands continued their dance across the keys, steady and sure. The people in the room sat frozen, witnesses to something profound and private. Even the children stayed quiet, sensing the sacred nature of this moment. Emma watched her mother with wide eyes, seeing for the first time that adults could hurt in ways she did not understand. The final notes of the nocturne faded into silence. Sarah sat motionless at the piano, her hands still resting on the keys, tears dripping onto the black and white surface. The room remained absolutely quiet. No one clapped. No one spoke. They all understood they had just witnessed something far beyond a simple piano performance. They had witnessed pain speaking louder than any words could ever express. Mrs. Chun moved first, breaking the heavy silence that had settled over the room. She approached Sarah slowly, as one might approach a wounded bird, and gently placed a weathered hand on her shoulder. Sarah flinched at the touch but did not pull away. She could not move. Her body felt frozen at the piano, her hands still resting on the keys as if they belonged there and nowhere else. "That was beautiful, dear," Mrs. Chun said softly, her voice carrying decades of wisdom and compassion. "Truly beautiful." The words broke something loose inside Sarah. A sob escaped her throat, raw and painful. She quickly covered her mouth with her hand, horrified at losing control in front of all these people. These strangers who had just seen something she had not intended to reveal. She stood abruptly, nearly knocking over the piano bench in her haste to escape. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have. I need to go." Emma rushed to her mother's side, confusion and concern written across her young face. "Mom, are you okay? Why are you crying?" Sarah could not answer. She grabbed Emma's hand and moved toward the door, desperate for air, for space, for the familiar safety of her car where she could hide from the eyes that had witnessed her breaking. Linda stood as they passed, reaching out as if to offer comfort, but Sarah hurried by without acknowledging her. The cool evening air hit Sarah's face as she pushed through the community center doors. She gulped it down, trying to steady her breathing, trying to rebuild the walls that had crumbled so completely. Emma walked beside her in confused silence, holding tightly to her mother's trembling hand. They reached the car and Sarah fumbled with her keys, dropping them twice before managing to unlock the doors. Once inside, she gripped the steering wheel and closed her eyes, fighting for composure. Emma sat in the passenger seat, too scared to speak, watching her mother with worried eyes. "I'm okay, sweetheart," Sarah finally managed, though her voice betrayed the lie. I just I haven't played piano in a long time. It brought back some memories. Sad memories? Emma asked quietly. Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to say more. She started the car and drove home in silence, her mind spinning with the shock of what had just happened. She had spent 15 years carefully avoiding anything that might crack her armor. She never listened to classical music. She walked past music stores without looking in the windows. She had successfully buried that part of her life so deep that she had almost convinced herself it never existed. But tonight, in just a few minutes, all of that careful construction had collapsed. The piano had pulled the truth out of her whether she wanted to release it or not. Her fingers had betrayed her, playing a piece that held too many memories, too much pain. At home, Sarah went through the motions of their evening routine like a robot. She made Emma a simple dinner, though she could not eat anything herself. She helped her daughter with homework, though the words on the page blurred together. She tucked Emma into bed, reading a story without really seeing the pictures. Emma hugged her extra tight before sleep. "You played really pretty, Mom," she whispered, "even though it made you sad." Sarah kissed her daughter's forehead, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. After Emma fell asleep, Sarah sat alone in the dark living room, staring at nothing. Her phone buzzed several times with text messages, but she ignored them. She knew it would be Linda, probably checking on her, offering concern that Sarah did not want to accept. The memories she had worked so hard to suppress came flooding back with brutal clarity. She was 17 again, full of dreams and music. She was sitting at a different piano in a different room, practicing for the state competition that would determine her scholarship to a prestigious music conservatory. Her fingers had flown over the keys with confidence and joy. Music had been everything to her then. Her language, her passion, her future. Her father had been so proud. He sat in his favorite chair, listening to her practice every evening after dinner. He was a quiet man, not given to displays of emotion, but music was the bridge between them. When Sarah played, he smiled. Those moments at the piano were the times she felt most connected to him, most seen and valued. And then, one night after practice, everything changed. Her father had complained of chest pain. Sarah remembered the fear in her mother's eyes, the frantic call to emergency services, the ambulance with its terrible flashing lights. She remembered holding her father's hand in the back of the ambulance, begging him to hold on, promising him she would play at the competition, promising him she would make him proud. But he died before they reached the hospital. A massive heart attack that no one had seen coming. One moment he was there, smiling at her music, and the next he was gone forever. Sarah had not touched a piano after that night. Not once. The competition came and went without her. The scholarship opportunity disappeared. Her mother, drowning in her own grief, barely noticed when Sarah packed away her sheet music and closed the piano lid in their home. Music became synonymous with loss. Every beautiful melody was now colored by the memory of her father's last evening, sitting in his chair, listening to her play. For years, Sarah convinced herself she had moved on. She went to community college instead of conservatory. She got a practical degree in accounting. She met and married a kind but ultimately incompatible man, and they had Emma before divorcing 3 years later. Sarah built a quiet, controlled life where nothing unexpected could hurt her, where nothing beautiful could be taken away. But tonight, she realized how much she had lost by running from her pain. She had not just given up the piano. She had given up the part of herself that could feel deeply, that could create beauty, that could be vulnerable. She had traded passion for safety and discovered that safety, while protecting her from pain, also isolated her from joy. Her phone buzzed again. This time she looked at it. Linda had sent several messages, each one gentle and concerned. The last one simply said, "If you ever want to talk, I'm here." No judgment. Just friendship. Sarah stared at the message for a long time. She had spent so many years keeping people at arm's length, protecting herself from connections that might bring pain. But sitting alone in the dark, she felt the weight of her isolation. Emma deserved a mother who was not just surviving but living. And maybe, just maybe, Sarah deserved that too. She thought about the piano, about how her hands had remembered what to do even after 15 years of silence. She thought about how the music had poured out of her, carrying all the grief and pain she had never properly mourned. It had been terrifying to break down in front of strangers, to lose control, to let her carefully maintained facade crack wide open. But there had also been something else. Something she had not expected. In those moments of playing, even through the tears and the pain, there had been a flicker of something that felt almost like relief, like a pressure valve releasing steam that had been building for too long. The music had spoken her truth when she had no words for it. Sarah looked toward Emma's bedroom door, thinking about her daughter's innocent request to play, about the hope in her eyes. Emma did not know the full story of why her mother avoided music. She only knew that something about the piano had made her mother cry. And yet, she had still said the playing was pretty. Maybe, Sarah thought, beauty and pain could exist together. Maybe she did not have to choose between remembering her father and protecting herself from hurt. Maybe there was a way to honor what she had lost while still allowing herself to feel, to create, to live fully. The thought was terrifying and hopeful all at once. Sarah sat in the dark for hours, wrestling with questions she had avoided for 15 years. When she finally went to bed, sleep did not come easily. But for the first time in a very long time, Sarah felt something shifting inside her. Something frozen beginning to thaw. The next morning arrived too bright and too early. Sarah woke with swollen eyes and a headache that pulsed behind her temples. Emma was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a bowl of cereal, humming a tune that Sarah recognized as the Chopin Nocturne from the night before. The sound sent a shiver through Sarah's body, part discomfort and part something else she could not quite name. "Morning, Mom," Emma said cheerfully, seemingly unaffected by the previous evening's emotional display. Children possessed a remarkable ability to accept the strange and unexpected, filing it away and moving forward without dwelling. Sarah poured herself coffee and sat across from her daughter, trying to appear normal. The kitchen was the same as it always was, with its worn countertops and the crack in the corner tile that Sarah kept meaning to fix. But somehow everything felt different. The world had not changed, but something inside Sarah had shifted during the night, like tectonic plates moving beneath the surface. "Mom, can I ask you something?" Emma looked up from her cereal, milk dripping from her spoon. Sarah's stomach tightened, but she nodded. "Of course, honey. Why did you stop playing piano? You're really good at it." The question was simple, innocent, but it hit Sarah like a physical blow. She wrapped her hands around her coffee mug, feeling the warmth seep into her palms. How could she explain to a 7-year-old the complexity of grief and loss? How could she make her understand that sometimes beautiful things become too painful to touch? "It's complicated, sweetheart," Sarah began carefully. "When I was younger, playing piano was very special to me. But something sad happened, and after that, it hurt too much to play. So I stopped." Emma tilted her head, processing this information with the seriousness that children sometimes bring to adult confessions. "But you played last night. Did it still hurt?" Sarah felt tears threatening again and blinked them back. "Yes," she admitted. "It did hurt. But maybe it also helped a little too." Emma seemed satisfied with this answer and returned to her cereal. Sarah sat in stunned silence at her own words. She had not planned to say that. She had not realized it was true until the words left her mouth. But sitting there in the morning light with her daughter, she recognized a truth she had been avoiding. Playing the piano had hurt terribly, but it had also released something that had been trapped inside her for far too long. After dropping Emma at school, Sarah drove to work in a daze. She worked at a small accounting firm, processing numbers and managing spreadsheets. It was steady, predictable work that required precision but not passion. Her coworkers were pleasant but distant. Sarah preferred it that way. She arrived on time, completed her tasks efficiently, and left promptly at 5. She existed in her job without really being present. But today, sitting at her desk, Sarah found it impossible to concentrate. The numbers blurred on her screen. Her mind kept returning to the community center, to the feel of the piano keys beneath her fingers, to the way the music had poured out of her like water from a broken dam. She kept hearing Mrs. Chun's gentle voice saying, "That was beautiful, dear." During her lunch break, Sarah did something she had not done in years. She opened her laptop and searched for information about the piano. Not just any piano, but specifically about music therapy and grief processing. She found articles about how music could help people work through trauma, how it provided a nonverbal outlet for emotions too complex for words. One article featured a woman who had lost her husband and found healing through returning to the violin, after decades away from it. Another discussed how music activated parts of the brain associated with memory and emotion, allowing people to access feelings they had buried. Sarah read each article hungrily, as if they held answers to questions she had not known how to ask. Her phone rang, interrupting her research. It was Linda. Sarah stared at the screen, her finger hovering over the decline button. But something made her hesitate. Maybe it was the article she had just been reading about connection and healing. Maybe it was exhaustion from carrying everything alone for so long. Whatever the reason, Sarah answered. "Hi, Linda." "Sarah, hi. I hope I'm not bothering you at work. I just wanted to check on you after last night." Linda's voice was warm and genuinely concerned, without a trace of pity or nosiness. "I'm okay," Sarah said automatically, then paused. "Actually, that's not entirely true. Last night was hard. I wasn't expecting to react that way." "You don't owe me or anyone an explanation," Linda said gently. "But I want you to know that what happened was nothing to be embarrassed about. You played beautifully, Sarah. Whatever that music meant to you, it was powerful and real." Sarah felt her throat tighten. "Thank you. I'm not used to people seeing me like that. Seeing me break down." "You didn't break down," Linda corrected softly. "You opened up? There's a difference." And I think Emma was amazed by her talented mother, not scared or upset. Kids are more resilient than we give them credit for. They talked for a few more minutes, and Sarah found herself sharing small pieces of her story. Not everything. Not the full weight of her grief and her father's death. But enough to let Linda understand that the piano carried memories both precious and painful. When they hung up, Sarah felt lighter somehow, as if speaking even a fragment of truth had eased a burden she did not know she was carrying. That evening, Sarah made a decision that surprised even her. After putting Emma to bed, she went to the small storage closet in the hallway. Behind boxes of old clothes and holiday decorations, pushed far into the back corner, was a black case covered in dust. Sarah pulled it out carefully, her heart pounding. She carried the case to the living room and set it on the coffee table. For several minutes, she just stared at it, gathering courage. Then, with trembling hands, she opened the latches. Inside, wrapped in faded cloth, were her sheet music books from high school. The pages were yellowed and slightly musty, but the notes were still clear. Chopin, Beethoven, Mozart. All the pieces she had once known by heart. Sarah pulled out the Chopin nocturne that she had played the night before. She studied the page, remembering how her father had loved this particular piece. He always said it sounded like moonlight on water, beautiful and melancholic at the same time. Looking at the notes now, Sarah could hear his voice, could see him sitting in his chair, his eyes closed as he listened. For the first time in 15 years, the memory did not feel like a knife in her chest. It still hurt. It would probably always hurt. But there was also a sweetness to it, a tenderness. Her father had loved her music. He had been proud of her talent. Those moments at the piano had been gifts, not curses. Sarah set the sheet music on the coffee table and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet street. She thought about the choices she had made after her father's death. The way she had tried to protect herself by shutting down, by avoiding anything that might make her feel too much. She had thought she was being strong, but maybe she had just been afraid. Tomorrow was Saturday. Emma had no school, and Sarah had no work. She could spend the day doing what she always did, laundry, cleaning, grocery shopping, the safe routines that filled her time without filling her life. Or she could do something different. Something scary. Something that might hurt, but might also heal. Sarah picked up her phone and typed a message to Linda before she could overthink it. "Is the community center open on Saturdays?" I was thinking maybe Emma and I could come by. If that's okay." The response came quickly. "It's open. Practice sessions from 10 to 12. We'll be there. I think Mrs. Chun would love to see you again." Sarah set down her phone and looked at the sheet music on her coffee table, at the dust-covered case, at all the physical remnants of the life she had abandoned. She felt terrified and hopeful in equal measure. She had no idea if she could do this, if she could really open herself up to music again, to the memories it carried, to the vulnerability it demanded. But for Emma's sake, and maybe for her own sake too, she was willing to try. The piano had spoken her hidden pain louder than any words could express. Maybe, just maybe, it could also speak her healing. One note at a time. Saturday morning arrived with unexpected sunshine. Sarah woke early, her stomach churning with anxiety about the decision she had made. Several times while getting ready, she nearly changed her mind. The familiar pull of safety tugged at her, whispering that it was easier to stay home, to maintain the walls she had built so carefully. But Emma bounced around the house with excitement, chattering about seeing Sophie and maybe hearing her mom play again. That simple enthusiasm gave Sarah the courage she needed. She packed the sheet music into her bag, though her hands shook as she did so. The community center looked different in the morning light, less intimidating somehow. Several cars were already in the parking lot when they arrived. Sarah recognized Linda's vehicle and felt a small measure of relief at seeing a familiar presence. Emma grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the entrance, completely unaware of the internal battle her mother was waging with every step. Inside, the main hall had been set up similarly to the previous evening. The piano sat in the center like a throne, commanding attention. Mrs. Chun was already there, arranging chairs and chatting with early arrivals. When she saw Sarah, her weathered face broke into a genuine smile. "Sarah, dear, I'm so glad you came back." The elderly woman approached and gently squeezed Sarah's arm. "What you shared with us on Thursday was a gift, even if it didn't feel that way to you." Sarah managed a small smile, though her throat felt tight. "I wasn't planning to share anything. It just happened." "The best music always does," Mrs. Chun said wisely. "It comes from a place beyond conscious control. From the soul, if you believe in such things." Emma ran off to find Sophie, and Linda appeared at Sarah's side with 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might need this," she said with an understanding smile. "First times are always the hardest. Is it that obvious I'm terrified?" Sarah asked, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Only to someone who's been there." Linda settled into a chair and gestured for Sarah to join her. "I had severe postpartum depression after Sophie was born. Took me 2 years before I could even admit I needed help. Walking into that first therapy session felt like jumping off a cliff." Sarah looked at Linda with new eyes. She had always seemed so confident, so perfectly put together. The revelation of her struggle made her suddenly more real, more human. "You seem so." "Okay now, I am okay. Most days," Linda sipped her coffee. "But getting here took time and work. And the courage to be vulnerable, which might be the hardest part." The session began with children taking turns at the piano. Sarah watched them play, some with confidence and others with hesitation. Mrs. Chun offered encouragement to each one, never criticizing mistakes, always finding something to praise. There was a safety in this space, Sarah realized, a permission to be imperfect. After about 30 minutes, Mrs. Chun approached Sarah with a gentle inquiry in her eyes. "Would you like to play something today? Only if you're comfortable, of course. No pressure at all." Sarah's immediate instinct was to refuse, to hide behind polite excuses. But Emma was watching her with hopeful eyes, and Linda gave her an encouraging nod. More importantly, deep inside, beneath all the fear and resistance, there was a tiny voice that wanted to try. That wanted to touch those keys again and see what emerged. "Maybe something simple," Sarah heard herself say. "I brought some old sheet music." She walked to the piano on unsteady legs, carrying the worn music book. She selected a piece she had learned as a child before her playing became technically advanced. It was a simple melody by Schumann, gentle and uncomplicated. Safe, she hoped. Sarah sat at the bench and placed the sheet music on the stand, though she barely needed it. Her fingers remembered the piece even after all these years. She took a deep breath and began to play. The first notes came out hesitant and quiet, but as she continued, muscle memory took over. The melody flowed from her fingers like water finding its old course. This time, there were no tears. Instead, Sarah felt something warm and bittersweet spreading through her chest. The music did not pull grief from her today. Instead, it pulled forth memories of her childhood, of her mother braiding her hair before piano lessons, of her father teaching her how to read sheet music at the kitchen table. Not every memory was colored by loss. Some were just beautiful. When she finished, genuine applause filled the room. Emma ran up to her, eyes shining. "That was so pretty, Mom. Will you teach me to play like that?" The question stopped Sarah cold. Teach Emma? She had never considered it. The idea of passing on this part of herself to her daughter was both terrifying and strangely appealing. "Would you want to learn?" she asked carefully. "Yes." "Then we could play together." Sarah looked at Mrs. Chun, who was beaming. "I think that's a wonderful idea," the elderly teacher said. "And Sarah, if you'd ever be interested in helping out here at the community center, we could always use volunteers with your talent. No commitment necessary, just an open invitation." The suggestion planted itself in Sarah's mind like a seed. She was not ready to commit to anything, but the possibility lingered. After the session ended, Linda invited Sarah and Emma to lunch at a nearby cafe. Sarah's first instinct was to decline, to retreat to the safety of home. But she thought about what Linda had shared, about the courage it took to be vulnerable. Maybe accepting friendship was its own form of bravery. At lunch, the girls chattered constantly while Linda and Sarah talked about ordinary things. Work, parenting struggles, favorite TV shows. Nothing deep or dramatic. But there was a comfort in the normalcy of it, in being seen as a whole person rather than just a collection of problems or pain. As they were leaving, Linda mentioned that she belonged to a book club that met twice a month. "We're always looking for new members if you're interested. It's really just an excuse to drink wine and complain about our lives, but we occasionally discuss the book too." Sarah surprised herself by saying she would think about it. A week ago, she would have refused immediately. But something was shifting inside her, like ice breaking up in a spring thaw. She was not transformed or healed. She still carried her grief and her scars. But she was beginning to see that maybe she did not have to carry them alone. That evening, after Emma was in bed, Sarah found herself sitting at the kitchen table with her old sheet music spread out before her. She ran her fingers over the pages, feeling the texture of the paper, seeing notes that represented countless hours of practice and passion. This had been such a huge part of who she was, and she had cut it out of her life like a surgeon removing a diseased organ. But what if she had removed something essential? What if in trying to protect herself from pain, she had also shut out joy? Sarah thought about her father, about how much he had loved listening to her play. If he could see her now, would he be proud of the safe, small life she had built? Or would he be sad that she had given up something that had once brought her so much happiness? She knew the answer. Her father had always encouraged her to take risks, to pursue her passions fully. He had been the one to convince her mother to spend money they did not really have on a good piano. He had driven her to lessons and competitions without complaint. He had believed in her talent more than she believed in herself. Honoring his memory did not mean hiding from the things he loved. It meant embracing them, carrying them forward, keeping that part of him alive through her music. Sarah pulled out her phone and sent a text to Mrs. Chun, whose number Linda had shared with her. "Would you be willing to teach me again? Not as a child student, but as an adult learner? I'm rusty and out of practice, but I think I'm ready to try." The response came within minutes. "It would be my absolute honor. Come by any Saturday morning and we'll work together. No fees, no pressure. Just music and healing." Sarah read the message 3 times, feeling tears slip down her cheeks. But these were different tears than the ones she had cried at the piano on Thursday night. These were tears of possibility, of tentative hope, of a door opening to a future she had thought was lost forever. She looked around her small kitchen at the life she had built through sheer determination to survive. It was not much, but it was hers. And maybe, just maybe, it could become more than mere survival. Maybe it could become a life worth living, full of music and connection and courage to feel deeply despite the risk of pain. The journey would not be easy. Sarah knew that. Healing never was. But she had taken the first steps, and that was something. She had touched the piano again. She had let her hidden pain speak through music. And now, perhaps, she could let her healing speak the same way. 3 weeks passed, and Sarah found herself falling into a new routine. Every Saturday morning, she and Emma arrived at the community center. While Emma took a beginner lesson with one of Mrs. Chun's assistants, Sarah worked with Mrs. Chun on rebuilding her technique and, more importantly, her relationship with music. The first few sessions were frustrating. Sarah's fingers were stiff and unpracticed. Pieces she had once played flawlessly now stumbled and stuttered under her touch. She made mistakes that would have mortified her teenage self. But Mrs. Chun was endlessly patient, reminding her that skill could be rebuilt, but the emotional courage to try could not be taught. "You're not starting over," Mrs. Chun said during the third session. "You're continuing. There's a difference. You carry all those years of practice inside you still. The muscle memory is there. You just need to trust it again." Slowly, Sarah began to trust. Not just her fingers, but herself. She practiced at home in the evenings after Emma went to sleep, using a keyboard that Linda had loaned her until Sarah felt ready to buy her own. The sound was different from a true piano, more electronic and less organic, but it served its purpose. Playing music again brought unexpected challenges. Some pieces were just pieces, notes arranged pleasantly that Sarah could play without emotional impact. But others opened floodgates. A Brahms intermezzo made her weep for 20 minutes. A Mozart sonata filled her with inexplicable joy. Music had become a direct line to feelings she had spent years avoiding. Sarah started keeping a journal about the experience, something Mrs. Chun had suggested. She wrote about which pieces affected her and how. She wrote about memories that surfaced while playing. She wrote about her father, sometimes for pages at a time, expressing things she had never told anyone. One entry read, "I realize now that I wasn't just grieving Dad's death. I was grieving the future we should have had together. He never got to see me graduate high school. Never met Emma. Never knew that I gave up music entirely. Part of me felt guilty for continuing to live and grow when he couldn't. Playing piano felt like moving forward without him, which felt like betrayal. But maybe the real betrayal was stopping. Maybe continuing to make music keeps his memory alive better than silence ever could." The insight shook something loose in Sarah. The next Saturday, she asked Mrs. Chun if she could play something at the upcoming community center showcase. It was a small event, just families and neighbors, nothing like the competition she had once entered. But the idea of performing again terrified her. "What piece are you thinking about?" Mrs. Chun asked, her eyes twinkling with encouragement. "The Chopin Nocturne," Sarah said quietly. "The one I played that first night. I think I need to play it properly, intentionally. Not as an accident, but as a choice." Mrs. Chun nodded approvingly. "That takes tremendous courage. I'm proud of you, dear." Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah practiced the nocturne obsessively. She worked through the technical passages until her fingers moved smoothly. She paid attention to dynamics and phrasing. But most importantly, she practiced feeling while playing. She let herself remember her father. She let herself grieve while making beauty. Emma watched these practice sessions with fascination. She was making good progress in her own lessons, learning simple songs with the enthusiasm only children possess. Sometimes Sarah would play a piece, and then Emma would play her little melody, and they would both laugh at the contrast. But there was joy in those moments, a connection between mother and daughter that had not existed before. "Mom, why does that song make you cry every time?" Emma asked one evening, referring to the nocturne. Sarah thought about how to explain it. "Because it reminds me of my dad, your grandpa who died before you were born. He loved this music. When I play it, I feel close to him again. That's good though, right?" Emma asked with the simple logic of childhood. Feeling close to people you love is good, even if it makes you sad. Out of the mouths of children, Sarah thought. You're absolutely right, sweetheart. It is good. The night of the community center showcase arrived too quickly. Sarah's nerves were frayed. She had not performed in front of an audience in 15 years. The showcase was informal, held in the same hall where she practiced every week, but it felt monumental. Linda had invited several people, and the room filled with more faces than Sarah expected. She sat in the back with Emma, watching other performers. Children played simple pieces with endearing mistakes. Adults showcased various levels of skill. The atmosphere was warm and supportive, but Sarah's hands grew clammy with anxiety. When Mrs. Chun announced her name, Sarah's legs felt like water. We have a very special performance now, Mrs. Chun said to the audience. Sarah Mitchell has recently returned to the piano after many years away. She's going to play Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. Sarah walked to the piano, her heart hammering. She could see Emma in the front row, giving her an encouraging thumbs up. Linda smiled warmly. Mrs. Chun nodded with calm confidence. Sarah sat at the bench and placed her hands on the keys. For a moment, she froze. The fear was overwhelming. But then she thought about why she was doing this. Not to prove her skill, not to impress anyone, but to honor her father, to reclaim this part of herself, to show Emma that it was possible to face your fears. Sarah began to play. The first notes trembled slightly, but she pushed through. As the familiar melody unfolded, she felt herself settling into it. This time, when the emotions came, she did not fight them. She let the sadness flow through her fingers into the music. She let the love and loss and longing express themselves in every phrase. Tears streamed down her face as she played, but she did not stop. This was not breaking down. This was breaking open. The difference, she now understood, was everything. The music swelled and ebbed, carrying the audience with it. People in the room were crying too, moved by the raw honesty of the performance. Sarah played the final notes with infinite tenderness, letting them fade into silence. For a long moment, no one moved. Then the applause began, genuine and heartfelt. Sarah stood and saw Emma running toward her. Her daughter crashed into her with a fierce hug. "That was the most beautiful thing I ever heard, Mom." Sarah held her daughter close, feeling the solid warmth of her, the reality of this life they shared. Music had once been everything to Sarah, then it had been nothing. Now it was finding its proper place, important but not all-consuming. A part of her life, but not the whole of it. Mrs. Chun approached after the showcase ended and many people had offered their congratulations. "You've come so far, Sarah, not just in skill but in spirit." "I couldn't have done it without your help," Sarah said sincerely. "No, dear. I just created the space. You did the hard work. You faced your pain instead of running from it. That's the bravest thing anyone can do." That night, lying in bed, Sarah reflected on the journey of the past few weeks. She was not healed, not entirely. Grief did not disappear so easily. But she had learned to carry it differently, to let it exist alongside joy rather than crowding out all other emotions. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother, who she had not spoken to properly in months. They had drifted apart after her father's death, each drowning in their own grief, unable to help each other. But Sarah had called her earlier in the week and told her about the showcase. The text read, "Your father would have been so proud of you tonight. I wish I could have been there. Maybe next time? I miss you, honey." Sarah typed back, "I miss you too, Mom. Next time for sure. I love you." It was a small step, but it mattered. Sarah was beginning to rebuild not just her relationship with music, but her relationships with people. With her mother. With Linda and the new friendships forming. With Mrs. Chun and the community at the center. And most importantly, with Emma, who was seeing a fuller version of her mother, flaws and all. The piano had been the key that unlocked everything, but the real work was in staying open, in continuing to choose vulnerability over safety, connection over isolation. It was terrifying and exhausting, but it was also deeply, profoundly worth it. 2 months after the showcase, Sarah faced her biggest challenge yet. Mrs. Chun called her with an unexpected request. The community center was hosting a memorial concert for families who had lost loved ones, and they wanted Sarah to be one of the featured performers. The concert would benefit a grief counseling organization, and all the performers would share brief stories about who they were honoring through their music. Sarah's first response was immediate refusal. Speaking publicly about her father, about her grief, felt too vulnerable, too exposing. Playing was one thing, but putting words to her pain in front of strangers was something else entirely. "I understand your hesitation," Mrs. Chin said gently over the phone. "But I think you underestimate how much your story could help others. Grief is so isolating. When people see someone else naming their pain, it gives them permission to acknowledge their own." Sarah promised to think about it. That night, she lay awake turning the idea over in her mind. The old Sarah, the one who existed before touching the piano again, would have refused without a second thought. But she was not that Sarah anymore. She was someone different now, someone who was learning that strength sometimes meant allowing yourself to be vulnerable. Over breakfast the next morning, she mentioned the invitation to Emma. Her daughter had grown accustomed to her mother's piano practices and performances, accepting them as part of their new normal. "Are you going to do it?" Emma asked, munching on toast. "I don't know. I'm scared," Sarah admitted. Emma looked thoughtful, far too wise for her 8 years. "Miss Anderson says being scared of something doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. It just means it's important." Sarah smiled at her daughter's teacher's wisdom, filtered through a child's understanding. "When did you get so smart?" "I've always been smart," Emma replied matter-of-factly, making Sarah laugh for the first time in days. That afternoon, Sarah called Mrs. Chun and accepted the invitation. As soon as she hung up, panic set in. She had 3 weeks to prepare, not just musically but emotionally. The thought of standing in front of an audience and sharing her father's story made her nauseous. Linda became an unexpected source of support. When Sarah confessed her fears over coffee, Linda shared her own experiences with therapy and public vulnerability. "The first time I admitted out loud that I was struggling with depression, I thought I would die of shame," Linda said. "But you know what happened instead? 3 other mothers came up to me afterward and said they felt the same way. My vulnerability gave them courage. What if I break down while speaking?" Sarah asked, voicing her deepest fear. "Then you break down," Linda said simply. "And the world keeps spinning." "Sarah, you've already cried in front of people while playing piano. This is just adding words to what your music already expresses." Sarah spent the next weeks preparing obsessively. She practiced the nocturne until she could play it in her sleep. But more challenging was writing what she would say. She went through a dozen drafts, each one feeling either too clinical or too emotional, too long or too brief. Finally, she settled on something simple and true. She would talk about her father, about their shared love of music, about the night he died and how she had blamed the piano for not being able to save him. She would talk about the 15 years of silence and what it cost her. And she would talk about finding her way back, about learning that honoring someone's memory meant living fully, not hiding from life. Sarah practiced her speech in front of the mirror, in the car during her commute, and late at night in her kitchen. Emma listened several times, offering feedback with the brutal honesty of children. "That part is boring, Mom. Can you tell a story instead?" So Sarah added stories. The time her father tried to teach her a jazz piece, and they both laughed at how badly it went. The birthday when he surprised her with tickets to see a famous pianist perform. The quiet evenings when no words were needed, just music filling the space between them. The memorial concert was held on a Saturday evening. The community center had decorated the hall with soft lighting and photos of loved ones that performers had submitted. Sarah had sent in a picture of her father from his 40th birthday, smiling in his favorite chair. Seeing it enlarged and displayed made her cry, but they were good tears. The audience was larger than Sarah expected. Over 100 people filled the seats, all carrying their own griefs and losses. Sarah sat backstage with the other performers, each one visibly nervous. They ranged from teenagers to elderly people, all united by loss and the courage to transform pain into music. A young man played guitar in memory of his sister who died in a car accident. An older woman sang in honor of her husband of 50 years. A teenage girl performed a violin piece for her grandmother. Each performance was raw and beautiful and heartbreaking. Each story was different, but the underlying theme was the same. Love persists beyond death. When Sarah's turn came, her legs trembled as she walked to the microphone set up beside the piano. She looked out at the audience and saw Linda and Emma in the third row, both giving her encouraging smiles. She saw Mrs. Chun in the front, nodding with calm assurance. She saw her mother, who had driven 3 hours to be there, wiping tears from her eyes. Sarah had not expected her mother to come. They had spoken more in recent weeks, slowly rebuilding their relationship, but her mother had never been comfortable with public displays of emotion. Seeing her there gave Sarah a surge of courage. "My name is Sarah Mitchell," she began, her voice shaking but audible. "I'm here tonight to honor my father, David Mitchell, who died 15 years ago of a sudden heart attack. He was 52 years old. I was 17. She paused, gathering herself. The audience waited patiently, no one rushing her. My father loved music, especially piano. He couldn't play himself, but he loved listening to me practice. The night he died, I had been playing Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, the piece I'm about to perform. After he died, I couldn't touch a piano. I thought that if I avoided music, I could avoid the pain of losing him." Sarah's voice cracked, but she continued. "I was wrong. Avoiding music didn't protect me from grief. It just made my world smaller and quieter and lonelier. For 15 years, I lived half a life because I was too afraid to feel fully." She told them about that night at the community center, about accidentally playing the nocturne and breaking down. She told them about the journey of coming back to music, about learning that grief and love were inseparable, that honoring someone's memory meant carrying them forward into life rather than freezing in the moment of loss. "My father taught me to love music," Sarah concluded, tears streaming down her face but her voice steady. "And music is teaching me to love life again, even with all its pain and loss. This piece is for him, with all the love and gratitude I carry." She sat at the piano and began to play. By now, she had played this nocturne dozens of times, but tonight felt different. Tonight, she was not just playing notes on a page. She was telling her father she remembered him. She was telling him she understood now that stopping music had not honored him. She was telling him she was finally ready to live the full, passionate life he had always wanted for her. The music poured out of her with a richness and depth she had never achieved before. Every note carried meaning, every phrase told part of their story. She played through her tears, through the memories, through the pain and the love that were so thoroughly intertwined they could never be separated. When the final notes faded, the silence in the room was profound. Then someone in the back began to clap, and the applause spread like a wave. But more than applause, Sarah heard sniffling and quiet crying throughout the audience. She had given them permission to feel their own griefs, their own losses, their own complicated relationships with memory and pain. After the concert, people approached Sarah with stories of their own. A woman who had stopped painting after her mother died. A man who had quit coaching soccer after losing his son. A teenager who had avoided their father's favorite restaurant for 2 years. Each person recognized themselves in Sarah's story, saw their own avoidance reflected back at them. Sarah's mother hugged her tightly, longer than she had in years. "I'm sorry I wasn't there for you after your father died," she whispered. "I was so lost in my own grief, I didn't see yours." "I wasn't there for you either, Mom," Sarah replied. "But maybe we can be there for each other now." Emma wrapped her arms around both of them, creating a 3-person hug that felt like healing incarnate. Linda took photos with her phone, capturing the moment. Mrs. Chun watched from a distance with the satisfied smile of a teacher who had witnessed transformation. Later that night, after the crowds had dispersed and the hall was quiet, Sarah sat alone at the piano for a few minutes. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, from that first accidental performance to tonight's intentional act of remembrance and healing. She thought about how terrified she had been to touch these keys again and how much courage it took to continue touching them. But she also thought about how much richer her life had become. She had friends now. She had reconnected with her mother. She had given Emma a gift beyond material things, showing her daughter through example that broken things could be repaired, that it was never too late to choose healing over hiding. Sarah played one more quiet piece before leaving, something gentle and hopeful. It was not for an audience. It was just for her, an acknowledgement of how far she had come and a promise to keep going. The road ahead would have challenges. Grief was not linear, and she knew there would be hard days when the piano felt too heavy to touch. But she also knew now that she was strong enough to face those days. Strong enough to feel deeply, to love fully, to let music be both her pain and her healing. 6 months had passed since the memorial concert, and Sarah's life had transformed in ways she never imagined possible. The change had been gradual, built on small choices made day after day to stay open rather than closed, to connect rather than isolate, to feel rather than numb. She now volunteered at the community center every Saturday afternoon, helping Mrs. Chen teach beginning piano students. Working with children who were just discovering music brought Sarah unexpected joy. She saw herself in their eager faces, remembered what it felt like when music was pure possibility rather than complicated history. One of her students was a shy 9-year-old boy named Marcus, whose father had recently been deployed overseas with the military. Marcus struggled with the piano, his fingers clumsy and uncertain, but he showed up every week with determination. Sarah recognized in him what Mrs. Chun had once seen in her, someone using music to process emotions too big for words. "Why do you keep coming?" Sarah asked him one day after a particularly frustrating lesson. "You could try a different instrument, something that might be easier." Marcus looked at the piano keys, thinking. "My dad used to play a little. Before he left, he said music was good for when you miss people. I miss him a lot." Sarah's heart contracted with empathy. She sat beside Marcus on the bench. "Then we'll keep working on it together. Music can hold all our missing, all our love. It's big enough for everything we feel." Through teaching, Sarah discovered a new dimension of her relationship with music. It was no longer just about her own pain and healing. It was about creating space for others to find their voices, their expressions, their ways of coping with life's difficulties. Her relationship with Emma had deepened significantly. They now had regular piano nights where they would play together, Sarah on the community center's piano or the upright she had finally purchased for their home, and Emma on her smaller keyboard. Sometimes they played the same piece together, Emma's simple version harmonizing with Sarah's more complex one. Other times they just improvised, making up melodies that made them both laugh. Emma had become quite good for her age, showing natural talent that made Sarah's heart swell with pride and a touch of bittersweet recognition. She would never push Emma the way she had once pushed herself. Music for Emma would be joy and expression, not pressure and perfection. Sarah's friendship with Linda had grown into something solid and sustaining. They met for coffee weekly, and Linda had introduced Sarah to her book club, which Sarah attended sporadically. The women in the group had welcomed her warmly, and Sarah found herself actually enjoying social interactions that once would have filled her with anxiety. Most surprisingly, Sarah had reconnected with her mother in meaningful ways. They talked on the phone several times a week now, sharing small details of their lives. Her mother had even started taking piano lessons herself, something she had always wanted to do but never pursued. They sent each other videos of their practice sessions, celebrating small victories and laughing at mistakes. "I think your father would be happy to see us both playing," her mother said during one phone call. "He always said music brought people together." Sarah had also made an unexpected decision regarding her career. After 15 years in accounting, she realized she had chosen the field not because it suited her, but because it was safe and uninspiring, requiring nothing of her heart. She began researching music therapy programs, wondering if perhaps she could combine her newfound passion with helping others. The idea terrified her. Going back to school at 33, changing careers entirely, stepping into a field that would require constant emotional engagement rather than the detached number crunching she had hidden behind for so long. But terror, she had learned, was not a reason to avoid something. It was often a sign that something mattered deeply. She applied to a part-time music therapy certification program at a nearby university. When the acceptance letter arrived, Sarah cried with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. She showed it to Emma that evening. "Does this mean you're going to be a student like me?" Emma asked with delight. "Yes, I suppose it does. We'll both be learning new things." "That's cool, Mom. Maybe I can help you study." The simplicity of Emma's acceptance, her complete faith that her mother could reinvent herself, gave Sarah courage. Children expected growth and change. They had not yet learned to be limited by fear of failure or others' judgments. On a warm spring afternoon, almost a year after Sarah had first touched the piano at the community center, Mrs. Chun invited her for tea in the small office behind the music hall. The elderly woman moved more slowly now, her arthritis making her fingers stiff, though her spirit remained vibrant. "I wanted to talk to you about something," Mrs. Chun said, pouring tea into delicate cups. "I'm thinking about retiring soon. My hands are not what they used to be, and I'm ready to rest." Sarah felt a pang of loss. Mrs. Chun had become so important to her journey. "I'll miss working with you." "Well, that's the thing," Mrs. Chun smiled. "I was hoping you might consider taking over some of my teaching responsibilities. Once you finish your music therapy training, of course. You have a gift for this, Sarah, not just for playing, but for helping others find their way to music." The offer stunned Sarah into silence. A year ago, she could not have imagined anyone trusting her with such responsibility. "I don't know if I'm qualified," she finally managed. "Qualification comes from more than certificates," Mrs. Chun said wisely. "It comes from understanding pain and still choosing beauty, from being broken and learning to make something whole. You understand what music can do for wounded souls because you've lived it." Sarah accepted the tea with trembling hands, overcome by gratitude and the strange sense of a circle completing itself. She had come to the community center broken and hiding. Now she was being offered a chance to help others find what she had found, healing through music and connection. That evening, Sarah sat at her piano at home, the one she had carefully chosen and saved for. It was not grand or expensive, but it was hers. Emma was asleep upstairs, and the house was quiet except for the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of neighbors. Sarah played the Chopin Nocturne, the piece that had unlocked everything. But now when she played it, the grief was not the only thing she felt. There was also gratitude for the father who had given her the gift of music. There was pride in how far she had come. There was hope for the future she was building, note by note, choice by choice. She thought about the woman she had been a year ago, so tightly wound around her pain that there was no room for anything else. That woman had been surviving, but she had not been living. The journey from survival to truly living had been the hardest thing Sarah had ever done. Harder than learning difficult piano pieces, harder than raising a child alone, harder than any challenge she had previously faced. Because it required something she had avoided for 15 years. Complete honesty about her pain and her limitations, and a willingness to let others see her in all her broken humanity. Sarah finished the nocturne and sat in the quiet afterward, her hands resting on the keys. She thought about Marcus and his deployed father, about Emma and her growing talent, about her mother rediscovering joy in learning piano, about all the students she would teach in the years ahead. She thought about the music therapy clients she would someday work with, helping them find their voices when words failed. Music had saved her, but not in the way she once thought it would. It had not saved her from pain or grief or loss. Instead, it had taught her that those things could coexist with beauty and joy and love. It had shown her that a full life meant feeling everything, not protecting yourself from feeling anything. Her phone buzzed with a text from Linda. "Piano night at the community center next Friday. You should play something. The new nocturne you've been practicing?" Sarah typed back, "I'll be there." Simple words, but they represented a profound commitment. A commitment to continuing to show up, to share her music and her story, to let herself be seen and known. To live not in the shadow of her pain, but in the full light of her healing, which was ongoing and imperfect and beautiful. She stood from the piano and walked to Emma's room, checking on her sleeping daughter. Emma lay curled under her blankets, her favorite stuffed bear tucked under one arm. Sarah gently brushed hair from her daughter's forehead, overwhelmed with love and determination. She would give Emma a different model than the one she had lived for so long. She would show her that setbacks were not endings, that pain was not permanent, that it was possible to return to things you thought were lost forever. Sarah returned downstairs and stood by the window, looking out at the quiet street. Somewhere in the city, there were other people like she had been, carrying hidden pain, convinced they had to bear it alone. Maybe someday her story would reach them. Maybe they would hear about the woman who stopped playing piano for 15 years and then found her way back. Maybe it would give them courage to touch their own abandoned dreams. Or maybe not. Maybe her story was just her own, small and specific, mattering most to the handful of people directly touched by it. And that was okay too. Not every transformation had to be grand or public. Sometimes the most important changes happen quietly, in community center practice rooms and home kitchens, in conversations over coffee, and in the willing choice to keep showing up. Sarah had learned that healing was not a destination but a practice. Some days would be easier than others. Some days the piano would feel like an old friend, and other days it would remind her too sharply of everything she had lost. But she was committed now to the practice of staying open, of allowing herself to feel, of making music and meaning from whatever life brought. She thought about her father, about what he would say if he could see her now. She imagined he would be proud, not because she had achieved anything remarkable by the world's standards, but because she had found her way back to herself, because she had chosen love and beauty and connection over safety and isolation and numbness. Sarah sat down at the piano once more and played something new, a piece she was composing herself, still rough and unfinished. It was a melody that held both sadness and hope, loss and discovery, pain and healing all woven together. It was the sound of her life as it was now, complex and imperfect and real. When she touched the piano that first night so many months ago, her hidden pain had spoken louder than words. But now, when she touched these keys, something else spoke just as loudly. Her resilience, her courage, her capacity to transform suffering into beauty. Her willingness to let music be both her wound and her healing, her past and her future, her grief and her joy. The notes filled her small home, drifting out into the night, carrying a message for anyone who might hear, that broken things can make beautiful sounds, that silence is not safer than song, that the courage to feel everything is the only way to truly live.